When people talk about SBR Gamefowl, one question always comes up. What is the best cross for SBR? Some breeders recommend hatch, others prefer Kelso. Some believe sweater creates the ideal combination, while others continue experimenting with gray, roundhead, and several other respected bloodlines. But here's the real question. Is there truly one perfect cross for SBR? Or does success depend on something much deeper than simply combining two famous bloodlines? In today's documentary, we'll explore the history of SBR, why breeders choose to cross it with other families, and the most talked about combinations discussed within the breeding community. Let's begin. Crossbreeding has always been an important part of poultry breeding. For generations, breeders have carefully combined different bloodlines in hopes of preserving desirable characteristics while improving consistency over time. However, responsible breeders understand one important principle. There is no magical cross that guarantees success. Every breeding program depends on thoughtful planning, careful observation, healthy breeding stock, and patience across multiple generations. This documentary is intended for educational purposes, helping viewers understand why different SBR crosses are commonly discussed and what factors breeders often consider when planning their breeding programs. Understanding the SBR bloodline. Before discussing possible crosses, we first need to understand what makes SBR unique. SBR, or Super Brown Red, is one of the most recognized bloodlines among many poultry breeders, especially in the Philippines. The family is often identified by its rich brown-red feather coloration and its long history within various breeding programs. Over time, different breeders have continued refining their own SBR families through careful selection. Because of this, not every SBR family is identical. Some may emphasize body structure, others may focus on consistency, vitality, or overall breeding quality. This reminds us of an important lesson. A bloodline name tells only part of the story. The quality of the individual family depends on years of responsible breeding and careful selection. That is why experienced breeders evaluate birds individually rather than relying solely on the reputation of a bloodline.
Why do breeders cross bloodlines? If a bloodline already performs well, why do breeders continue crossbreeding? The answer is surprisingly simple. Every breeding program has different objectives. Some breeders hope to preserve specific family characteristics. Others aim to combine desirable qualities from two well-established bloodlines. Crossbreeding, when planned responsibly, allows breeders to explore genetic diversity while continuing to select birds that meet their long-term goals. However, experienced breeders understand that successful crossbreeding requires much more than simply pairing two famous names. Healthy breeding stock, good structure, strong family consistency, and detailed breeding records all play important roles. Without these foundations, even well-known bloodlines may fail to produce consistent results. This is why successful breeding is built on careful planning rather than shortcuts. SBR crossed with hatch. Among the combinations often discussed by breeders is SBR crossed with hatch bloodlines. Many breeding programs explore this pairing because hatch families have long been respected for their influence in poultry breeding history. Breeders interested in this combination often hope to preserve the recognizable characteristics of SBR while introducing selected qualities from carefully maintained hatch families. As with every breeding project, results may vary, depending on the health, quality, and consistency of the individual parent birds. This highlights an important truth. The success of any cross depends less on the names involved and more on the quality of the breeding program behind them. Responsible breeders evaluate every generation before making future breeding decisions. SBR crossed with Kelso. Kelso is one of the world's most recognized bloodline families, appreciated by breeders for its long history and influence on modern breeding programs. Because of this reputation, some breeders have experimented with combining carefully selected SBR and Kelso families while observing which characteristics are consistently passed to future generations. However, no responsible breeder can guarantee that every SBR cross-Kelso cross will produce identical results. Genetics are complex, every bird is unique, and responsible selection remains one of the most important factors in any successful breeding program. Instead of asking, which bloodline is always best, experienced breeders often ask, which birds best fit my long-term breeding objectives? That single question has guided successful breeding programs for generations.
SBR X sweater.
Another bloodline frequently mentioned in breeding discussions is sweater. Over the years, sweater families have become well known among poultry enthusiasts around the world because of their long breeding history and continued influence in modern breeding programs. For this reason, some breeders have explored combining carefully selected SBR families with sweater bloodlines. The goal is not to create a perfect bird. Instead, many breeders hope to preserve desirable characteristics from both families while continuing to improve consistency over future generations. However, experienced breeders know that no bloodline combination guarantees identical results. Even offspring from the same parents may show different characteristics. That is why responsible breeders evaluate each generation individually rather than making assumptions based only on pedigree. Good breeding is built on observation, not expectation. SBR x Gray. Gray bloodlines have remained popular for generations and are often recognized by their distinctive appearance and long history in poultry breeding. Because of their reputation, some breeding programs have experimented with SBR x Gray combinations. Rather than chasing trends, responsible breeders carefully observe the offspring over time. They evaluate overall health, body structure, feather quality, vitality, and consistency before making future breeding decisions. This long-term evaluation helps breeders understand which birds should remain in the breeding program. One successful generation does not guarantee lifelong consistency. Responsible breeding always requires patience. SBR x Roundhead. Roundhead is another respected bloodline frequently included in breeding discussions. For decades, breeders have appreciated Roundhead families for their historical importance and influence on many established breeding programs. Some breeders choose to combine selected SBR and Roundhead families to study how different characteristics are inherited across generations. Again, the focus is not simply on creating a new cross. The goal is careful selection. Only through observation, record-keeping, and responsible breeding management can a breeder determine whether a particular family continues to meet long-term objectives. Bloodline names may attract attention, but consistency is earned through generations of careful work. Other promising SBR crosses. Beyond hatch, Kelso, sweater, gray, and Roundhead, many breeders continue exploring other combinations based on their own breeding goals. Some prefer preserving an established family with minimal changes. Others carefully introduce genetics from another respected bloodline while maintaining detailed breeding records. Every breeding program is different. Geography, climate, housing, nutrition, management, and breeder experience all influence the outcome. For this reason, responsible breeders rarely claim that one combination works best for everyone. Instead, they focus on producing healthy, consistent birds that meet their own long-term breeding standards. Common crossbreeding mistakes. Crossbreeding can be exciting, but several common mistakes often reduce long-term success. The first mistake is changing bloodlines too quickly. Some beginners introduce new bloodlines every breeding season before fully evaluating previous generations. As a result, they lose consistency and make it difficult to identify which characteristics are being passed on. Another mistake is selecting breeders based only on popularity. A famous bloodline name should never replace careful evaluation of health, structure, and family consistency. Poor record keeping is another major problem. Without accurate breeding records, breeders often repeat unsuccessful combinations or lose valuable information that could improve future decisions. Finally, many beginners expect immediate results. Responsible breeding is a long-term process. The most respected breeding programs were built over many years through patience, observation, and careful selection, not shortcuts. Is there really a best cross? After exploring several of the most talked about SBR crosses, we arrive at the biggest question. Is there really one best cross for SBR? The honest answer, not universally. There is no bloodline combination that guarantees the same outcome for every breeder. Why? Because breeding is influenced by many factors. The health of the parent birds, the consistency of the family, the breeder's selection process, nutrition, housing, management, and patience across multiple generations all play a major role. Two breeders can use the same bloodline names and still produce very different results. That's why experienced breeders evaluate families, not just famous labels. What successful breeders have in common? When we study respected breeding programs from different parts of the world, one pattern appears again and again. Successful breeders rarely chase every new trend. Instead, they stay committed to a long-term plan. They keep detailed breeding records, they observe every generation carefully, they remove birds that do not meet their breeding goals, and they continue learning year after year. Their success comes from discipline and consistency, not from finding a mythical perfect cross. In reality, the breeder often has a greater influence on the future of a bloodline than the bloodline name itself.
How to choose a cross responsibly. If you're planning a breeding program, start by asking yourself a few important questions. Are the parent birds healthy? Have they been raised under good management? Do they come from a family known for consistency? Can you keep accurate records of future generations? If the answer to these questions is yes, then you already have a much stronger foundation than someone who focuses only on bloodline names. A responsible breeding program begins with planning, not guesswork. SBR has earned its reputation through years of careful breeding and preservation. The same can be said for Hatch, Kelso, Sweater, Gray, Roundhead, and many other respected bloodline families. Each has its own history, each has its own strengths, but no bloodline can replace thoughtful breeding decisions. The most successful breeders understand that every generation is an opportunity to learn. Rather than searching for shortcuts, they focus on improving their flock one careful decision at a time, and that may be the most valuable lesson of all. So, what actually works when crossing SBR? The answer is surprisingly simple. A successful cross depends less on choosing a famous name and more on choosing healthy, consistent parent stock, maintaining accurate records, and following a clear long-term breeding plan. Bloodlines provide history, but responsible breeding determines the future. When knowledge is combined with patience and careful observation, breeders place themselves in the best position to build strong and consistent families over time. Now we'd like to hear from you. Which SBR cross do you find most interesting? Have you worked with any of these bloodline combinations? Share your thoughts and experiences respectfully in the comments below. If you enjoy educational documentaries about gamefowl bloodlines, breeding history, genetics, and responsible poultry breeding, please support Chicken Matter Talks by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications for future documentaries. Every respected bloodline has a story. Every breeding program is a journey of patience, observation, and continuous learning. Thank you for joining us here on Chicken Matter Talks. Keep learning, keep improving, and we'll see you in our next educational documentary.